Record. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Roundabout Books Tuesday virtual author series. My name is Julie and I'm the events manager at the store. Before we get started with tonight's event, I want to remind everyone to check our event calendar online or on Facebook to find out about upcoming events and book clubs. On March 24th, local author Michelle Davis will be in the store to talk about her third book, The Invitation. Then on March 29th, we'll be joined by Peter Zehutlin to talk about Annie Londonderry, who was the first woman to bicycle the world in 1894. And on March 31st, Portland author Emmy Lund will be in the store to talk about her debut book, The Boy with a Bird in His Chest. And as some of you might know, we are expanding and renovating the store, so make sure to check our website for details on days we might have modified hours or closures. And as we are on Zoom, I just ask everyone to stay muted while we're chatting, and then we'll do a Q&A towards the end. And then I just want to remind everyone that we are being recorded and we will post this to YouTube, which has all of the recordings of our events since May 2020. So tonight we are joined by Lilliam Rivera, author of The Education of Margot Sanchez, Never Look Back, Dealing in Dreams, and the Goldie Vance middle grade series, and Barely Floating, to discuss her latest book, We Light Up the Sky. So New York Times bestselling author Adrienne Marie Brown says, "This book is for right now, especially teenagers navigating losses from COVID-19, seeing the injustices of our current system, feeling the planet change, needing so much from schools and community, learning to fight for the future they deserve through their grief. The monsters are structural racism and poverty, and the aliens are here to remind us what matters." So Lilliam, thank you so much for joining us here tonight to talk about this book.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And it's always great to speak about my book and to even have anyone just read it. It's always it's fun for me to even remember why I wrote it.
Right. Sometimes, I mean, as many people may not know, the publishing process can be long. So sometimes, you know, you finished this book 2 years ago before you're going to maybe be talking about it again. So I do want to say we'll try not to mention any major spoilers of the book for those who have not read it yet. But, you know, we're going to talk about lots of fun stuff. So the book follows three main characters, Luna, Pedro, and Rafa, with a few chapters or scenes focusing on other characters. How did you decide to have the chapters from different perspectives, and did it make it harder or easier to develop each of those main characters?
Yeah, I knew. Well, first I was reading before I started any project. I read a lot of, science fiction kind of first contact stories. I reread The Martian Chronicles. I reread Carl Sagan's Contact. I reread what's other science fiction, any kind of Ray Bradbury's fiction, book, anything that that I've read before, and I wanted to just just read the re-look at these books that I read when I was really young. And I wanted the points of view to not just be, for the most part, I've always written first person point of views, but I wanted this almost detachment to happen still, like this kind of like alienation in a lot of ways of these characters. And I felt like if I would do it in a close third person, that might give that feel of really kind of being the person, the narrator above, looking at these things happening. And so I've always thought that that's the way I would look at, Luna, Pedro, and Rafa, and just play around with their point, with what they see, and sort of being this kind of like the spy, or the spirit, in a way of just looking at them. And they're so very different. They're all living in their own kind of sphere, their own kind of bubble in a lot of ways. And then slowly seeing that forcing them forced to have to let go of these kind of walls that they've created to maintain whatever it is they're maintaining, secrets or personalities or whatever it is, and just sort of letting all of that go and dealing with this kind of catastrophe that occurs to them.
You know, what's interesting when you bring up them having walls is that they all three do, but it turns out that they're all for kind of similar reasons, right?
Mhm.
I mean, obviously we all put up walls to stop from hurting, but Luna has lost someone very important to her. Pedro has an uncle who just berates him, and he also just feels, it's even on the back of the book, too much, which I think a lot of us have felt. And then, you have Rafa with the walls because he has these other, but they're all secrets, and then
Right.
when they bring them down, they have so much more in common than,
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
like that was this idea of like you go to a big school, and this school, Fairfax High School, where they attend, is just not even a block away from where I live. It's near where I live, and so um, I see these kids all the time coming in, and they take buses into the school. They come from all over LA,
Mhm.
and so I know that the school itself is vast and has many different cliques and many different, just like high school, and so you can go to this big school and just be a stranger, in there, and live in this kind of like no one knows really what your life is like.
Mhm.
Even with, especially with Pedro, who's very outspoken and very like in your face kind of person, even he feels that he is not connecting with these kids that these students that he's known for way longer, right? That he's still not, he's seen as this, whatever facade he's been portrayed, that's sort of just at this very superficial level. And I love that they're able to connect in a way that surprises them,
Mhm.
that even if a kind of an alien kind of lands in the city, and you're forced to have to connect with a person that may be near you that you never really even wanted to connect to before, and just sort of forced to like really see them in a way that they haven't been able to see, to be shown. It's a kind of honest depiction of the way you are when you're dealt with like something as traumatic as like an alien invasion or COVID, like these
Yes.
big things. It really kind of reflects how people really are.
So that's perfect, because my next question, so the book is without mentioning a specific year or date, but it's hyper
Mhm.
current. And, a lot of times with YA, we kind of get that. We'll get some maybe pop culture references, something like that, that gives us a little bit of like a time frame, or just very near past current things.
Right.
But the inclusion of COVID-19 in the way that you're doing it is so hyper current. Had you started writing this before COVID-19?
I had the idea for the story. I knew I always wanted to write an alien invasion story. That was like, I knew my next project would be that. I didn't know when I wrote the draft that it would be in the midst of a pandemic, that I would have a deadline still in that pandemic. And so there was the question really of whether or not to include
Mm.
COVID, right? And in my head, in my mind, I really innocently believed that we would be over, like it would be maybe in a year. I knew my book was future, like near future, right? It would be like within 2 years after COVID ended. I didn't know that we would still be in this, in the pandemic itself, right? But I knew that I wanted to speak about it. Because the book, in the one big theme throughout, is really this idea of grief
Mhm.
and grieving. And I think all of us at some point, all of us, we haven't allowed ourselves that moment to grieve,
Yeah.
like things that we lost, not just even just people like family members, obviously, but also just moments and memories and time and milestones and birthdays, all these things, touching and all that kind of hugging a person, like that stuff is just, we haven't really had a mark of grieving that. And so there was that depletion I felt when I was writing it, was this despair and craving connection. I felt like that was it. That was this craving connection and being seen, and knowing that this person next to you yes, I'm at a loss too, you know, and it was really kind of what I was striving for, even for myself, like through these characters of like wanting to connect and be seen in a lot of ways.
So then what inspired you to have the alien, the visitor, look like Luna's cousin? I mean, that's, like it obviously has an arc, right? And when we
Mhm.
get to the ending, which I still have a question about without giving too much away, there is obviously like you know, there are things, but it's kind of it's an interesting thing to think about if you had lost someone in to COVID-19, and a lot of people it was very sudden. We think you're getting better, and then
Mhm.
you're
Mhm.
not. Um, yeah, what made you think to use Tasha that way?
Oh, I was really reading at the time a lot about this idea of cosplaying,
Mm,
this idea of people, white people just all of a sudden really kind of like, I'm gonna be a Latina, or I'm
mm,
gonna be, and there was this idea, that concept, that I think it was Alec Baldwin's wife at the time was like revealed that she wasn't from Spain or wherever she was from. And it was just this whole idea of like, this is a persona that she created, and I was fascinated by that because this is not the first thing, right? It's like this is something that's kind of historical, right? And so I kept on kind of spinning in my head this concept of wearing a mask, and what does that look like, and stirring up this maliciousness in a lot of ways. Is a really violent kind of thing if you think about it. And here's this alien that decides to take on a form, and for whatever reason latches on this pain, right? This grief, this memory that's tied to Luna very deeply. Luna holds this picture all the time. She is kind of putting on, like, kind of the fingerprints of her grief onto this picture, and it somehow, kind of translates to this character, to this form, this alien form who, creates this kind of cosplay mask that it wears. And I don't know, there was something about that felt not only scary but also a play on on memories and grief and
mm.
how it can manifest. um and I really wanted to play around with that, this idea.
Yeah. Well, and it heightens it obviously, because when she finally does see her, and her friend,
Right.
Dad is, like, stop it, and you need to get over this. And, you know, I hope that I've never said to someone, you need to get
I
over this.
know.
And I think about, it's been 20 years since my grandpa died, but if we have a
Mm,
conversation about him, I'm going to cry because I just miss him so
right.
terribly much. So it's interesting what we're going to see in the next couple of years with grief related to COVID. I know they just released a study about depression related to uh, having COVID because of
Right.
the social isolation, but all of it in general. Um, so that kind of leads well into my next question, because I read through the interview you did with We Need Diverse Books, and I just want to give a shout out to them and to anyone watching this to please check out their website and hashtag. And they feature so many good books that need to be read by more people. But you mentioned the Martian Chronicles,
Mhm.
and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which is that kind of thing that you
Yeah.
read growing up. But I also saw things in here that reminded me of Ray Bradbury's The Illustrated Man.
Yes.
And then, but what is it about those books, like, as maybe a kid with science fiction, like what connected that to you so hard?
Oh, I guess there's this idea, I grew up, I've always said this, I grew up in the Bronx in housing projects, and the housing projects are really kind of like these social experiments,
Mm,
like of housing, right? And I could look, it was home still, but I could look back on the history of how those places were created, and this idea of like, oh, we're going to build this building and it's going to how be able to have affordable housing, and here's the park here, and it's just really kind of fast. I'm really fascinated with this, like the design of that aspect, and I don't know, like I guess as a young person, I just always had those ideas of like what ifs, like what if an alien came
Yeah.
down, or what does that look like for a person of color to have to deal with an invasion, or how would they treat us, if that were to happen. And to set it in Los Angeles, especially in this neighborhood. This neighborhood is a very kind of affluent neighborhood, and they have a strip of sneakers, and it's like sneakerheads. So you have a lot of urban streetwear that's being sold just a block up. And so then it used to be Greek Orthodox as well. So it's a really interesting neighborhood and how it's changed. And I'm again fascinated by this. Here's a social experiment of like what used to be here, and how right at the time when the pandemic happened and we had the Black Lives Matters marches happening right here on this block, how the National Guard ended up setting up shop here, and and young people are the ones who are leading these marches. Like young people are the ones who are leading these movements. And so I'm like always aware of like, how are these authority figures really kind of manipulating who gets to be saved? Who gets to, who is it that, oh, there's looting happening. But, these places are being set up in this, prices that are outrageous, like it's just this idea, right? It like continues and continues. And so it really is, those are the kind of things that I want to write about. I grew up in a social experiment and that, those buildings are still exist now, and I'm really interested in trying to explore what that looks like for a young person, a young person who has to navigate all of these things, who has to navigate police authority, police, and what their mindset is when they see a young person, or when they see a young person of color.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do want to talk about the cover. So over the years, especially maybe probably like the last 5 or 6, there's been a debate about featuring BIPOC characters on the covers of YA, and that if you don't, there's maybe some whitewashing, or this was something we studied in my graduate program with publishing. But what are your well, I want you to talk a little bit just about this cover, because I read in another interview too, but it's, it's hand illustrator. I love it, the hand drawn. But like, what are some of your thoughts about kind of that BIPOC representation in YA, and what a cover can mean, both good and bad?
I've been really blessed and lucky to have amazing covers. All my books have just beautiful illustrations, and most of them have been done by people of color, illustrators of color. And so that's always been, I've been very lucky, and my editors have been very open, and I have been very vocal about like, oh, can we try this person? Can we work with this person? Or I always create Pinterest boards so then they could see ideas of what I envision, what my characters might look like, and so that they know, what I can see, what I'm seeing, in my head. I come from a background, my background is in journalism. So my first job was at Latina magazine, and that was a magazine that was bilingual, and it was first lifestyle women's magazine for Latina, for Latinas. And so I know what the power is to have a Latina, a brown person on the cover of a magazine. I had to, deal with publicists who refused to put them on our covers. So I understand the impact, and have advertisers who are like, oh, it's not going to sell because people, brown people, Black people don't buy these magazines. So I totally understand that, the arguments, right? Because I've
Yeah.
heard them. But I, first of all, first and foremost, I want my covers to look beautiful. That's key.
Yeah.
Because I am a visual person, and I want, and I will pick up a book because of the cover, if it's
Yeah.
striking enough. But to have it really reflect the characters that I'm writing, the brown and black characters that I'm writing, that's just powerful,
Yeah.
for a young person to be able to see that in a bookstore and be like, oh, this is gorgeous, oh, these characters are brown, even better, like it's just I don't know, it's just really empowering for young people to be able to grab hold of a book that it's not even a reflection of like I see myself or a mirror. I really believe like not only is it beautiful,
Mhm.
but it's also just why, just pushing the envelope of what can be seen on a cover,
Right.
And I love buying, like here I am. I've read Frankenstein 500 million times. I keep buying new versions of the book because they have a new cover. And I'm like, oh, this is gorgeous. Let me buy that, And so to me, it's just like also just to have as a piece of art, I'm buying a piece of art by an artist who's a person of color. That also is a big deal for me.
Yeah. It was just it was a very interesting topic with our school because we were publishing the third book in basically a trilogy, whether
Mhm.
the author intended them originally to be that way. But the first two featured Jewish characters. So of course, by extension, Caucasian. And
Right,
we
right,
had
right,
done the book covers with just basically like the mouth down. And that was for the first two. And so it was very, on brand. But the
right.
third book, which is set in the future, she's Jewish, Black, and
Mm,
Middle Eastern. And
mm.
so, and I think Turkey, but we were
Right,
like, okay, wait, if we don't do the face, then we're also off brand. But if we cover her face, then it's are we whitewashing the cover? If we don't
right.
put her on, it doesn't go with the rest of the covers. And in the end, the other problem is the first two covers, the models for those were people in the program. By the time I got there to work on this book, which was around 2016, there
Mhm.
wasn't anybody in the program that could represent that character.
Right. Well, I mean, the funny thing is like how the trends are, because before at one point there was a time when maybe you would get the back of a person, like the
Mhm.
silhouette, right?
Yeah,
And I
oh, the
think one of
nose, a
right,
hair, something
right.
to still, yeah. I
Yeah.
did a project and I've seen a lot of those where they wanted you to understand that the main character wasn't white, but to maybe not hit you over the head with it. But why
Right.
not? Like, why not
Yeah.
say, I want you to pick up this book because the main character is not who you are. So you're going to read something different and it's a
Mhm,
different
mhm, mhm.
perspective. So yeah, it's a very interesting
Well, it's just,
dynamic.
I mean, and I go back to like my own reading, like I read so many, this is not, it's an old story that a lot of my peers have said that they didn't read a person of color until they got to college,
Yeah.
and so then the books that we were grabbing from the bookstore, from the library, were always of a person who wasn't, that looked that Gus. But it didn't matter to me because I knew I was going to fall into a story that I was going
Mhm.
to either love or hate or put down or want to read in a sequel, so I didn't think about it at all. But I feel like if the prevalence, if the emphasis is of making it like, yes, more people of color, then it won't be a big deal. It'll
Yeah.
just be, oh, here, I'm going to grab this story. Oh, it's a story about an alien vision. I'll grab it.
Yeah.
Like it won't make a difference,
Yeah.
I hope.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The content, yeah, you want them to get pulled in by each. And if that's what someone says, oh, I don't recognize the person on this cover. I want to learn more about them, then I
Right.
hope then that, yeah, happens a lot. So I do want to talk about the ending for a minute, because I do think it's more reminiscent of classic sci-fi, and like we've already mentioned in the Twilight Zone, and
Right.
maybe
Right.
like not as YA. So when you were writing it, but then also maybe with your editors, was there any discussion about this being an unusual ending to a YA book?
No. But it's funny you mentioned Twilight Zone, because I think I when I went to college, I went to Binghamton, and Binghamton University, Rod Serling, I don't know if he was born there. I think he was born in Buffalo, but he lived there. And so I've always been like, oh, I love Twilight Zone, of course. I wanted to be open
Mhm.
to interpretation and stuff. But I also was really kind of thinking about those kind of like Twilight Zone-esque, kind of X-Files-esque, all these things that I watched obsessively, and wanted to just sort of lean into, like, not everything is neatly tied up,
Mhm.
like, and all these disaster movies that I used to watch. Maybe I was way too young, but like things like Towering Inferno, or these are like my parents' movies, and I would watch them, and they always were like multiple personal, points of view, and who's doing something across the city, and and it was, I love those stories, and so they all, I just didn't want it to be like, oh, here this is what's going to happen. I wanted it to be vague, because I felt very uncertain, even at the time when I was rewriting it.
Yeah.
The uncertainty of everything that's been happening with us was really, really living through me at the
Yeah.
time when I was rewriting it.
The uncertainty of COVID. I mean, even today,
Mhm. Yes.
because I'm listening to the news and they're like, there might be another variant, and I'm like, okay. They're like, there might be a fourth shot, and I'm like, okay. But
No,
it
you
did
just
make me
accept it.
right. I'm just like, give me the shot, it's fine. But it did make me think of so I'm a fan of the kind of YA niche of apocalyptic, post-apocalyptic, new
Mhm.
world order kind of stuff, but it does seem like we get into those after this big thing has happened, right? And we'll find
Mhm.
out more about it by different things. I think about like the Hunger Games. We never
Mhm.
actually see Panem come into
Right.
power. We just know, what happens before they need another revolution. And you think of, movies like adaptations of War of the Worlds, or
Mhm. Mhm.
a couple other ones, but it's always, which are, obviously very similar to this, but I feel like a lot of times we see it, even The Walking Dead. Well, the zombies are already here, but
Yes.
what happened leading up to that? We always get
Right.
this, or I'm remembering a movie from the 80s that scared me so bad when I was a kid, where I think a nuclear bomb has gone off.
Oh my goodness.
Is
I
it
know
called
which one you're
Tomorrow,
talking
where
about,
the day not well the day after tomorrow is about like a ice storm, which I love that movie, but
but I do know what you mean. That
I
movie
remember
scared me
watching
so
it and just being
badly.
so scared. It was
So
very
scary.
realistic, but again, it was
Mhm.
after this big thing happens, and
Right.
where we're in this of, yes, COVID, but like just all of a sudden, bam, this thing happens, and then it's like, okay, what are we going to do next? And then it's like, okay, what are you going to do next? And I'm like, wait, where's
Right.
the rest? Um, but that was so interesting to me, because it did make me think again of things like Bradbury's The Illustrated Man, and so many of
Mhm.
those short stories that are so open-ended to interpretation. And it was, for a long time, I felt like maybe I didn't like those kinds of things, because I wanted there to be some sort of, I really like mysteries. So there's always kind of
The closure. Yeah, you wanted
there's,
it to be like,
yeah,
oh,
there's
it's being
closure,
solved.
and we're so without closure right now on so many
Right.
things. That did feel, because like I'm like, there's only 10 more pages. What's happening?
Oh.
But it
Yeah,
felt
I wanted to, I really was nodding to those stories,
yeah.
to those ideas of open-ended opening, like letting my imagination, like what happens next, like, oh, where would it go next, and I kind of love those kind of stories where it's just, I've written a couple of novels like that. Like, this is the second novel that I've done that, where we're not sure what happens to the characters afterwards. And I just love that. I love that. And because it really comes back to like faith in a lot of ways, either you believe that these characters have fallen in love with each other and are going to try to save each other in a lot of ways, and that's, I do. So
Yeah.
I have faith that their future is still pretty, open for them. It's pretty safe for them, I think,
I mean, that's
but
super realistic too. I mean, obviously, a lot of times when we're talking about science fiction, fantasy, we're like,
mhm,
these are things that could never happen. And it's like, well, actually, the uncertainty of tomorrow is exactly what happens. And it kind of, we haven't talked about this, but one of the things that Luna and with the alien Tasha is she feels bad about not going to protests. Luna or Tasha, real Tasha, was getting involved in that. And that's,
mhm,
that allusion back to right as COVID is shutting us down, you have, George Floyd and a lot of things happening that gets people out on the streets, even during a pandemic. Like
mhm.
those are the things that you have to care about, even, in a pandemic. And so it's interesting that it keeps coming up for her. And
Mhm.
so in that sense, I really liked that open-ended of we're going to go and protest, or we're going to go and tell everyone else what to do, but we have no idea how this is going to end. And I feel like that is the commentary on a lot of these social justice protests is
Right.
we don't know what's going to happen from them, but we better stand up now or no one else is going to.
Yeah, and that is really something that's cyclical, right? Because if I've read about the Young Lords, I've read about the Black Panthers, and at those
Mhm.
moments, they really believed that they were going to die,
Yeah.
for this cause. They really believed in their cause, and they really believed that there were malicious, people out there who were trying to kill that cause, right? And so Luna's guilt for maybe not being a part of that movement feeds off, it's being fed off and is being manipulated by this being, and it's almost like she's searching for forgiveness, and here she thinks is her opportunity of being able to find forgiveness in this cosplaying alien, and she just, as everyone, it's just this idea of like she has to forgive herself, or she has to, there are ways to, we all have our chance, we all have our job and our role in these movements, and not all of them is marching out in the streets. There are other ways of moving that movement forward. And so I really wanted that to reflect in Luna's choices
Yeah.
later on.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that because, she really does beat herself up because after, her cousin dies, she's like, I just couldn't do it. And it's like, that makes total sense though. I mean,
Right.
it absolutely does. There's so many different ways that grief manifests for people. And on the flip side of that, in the last 4 or 5 years with politics and COVID, it's hard to sometimes admit that you have to choose, but if you can't take care of you, you can't take care of anybody else.
I mean, the simplest thing is just, I don't know, there were moments when I felt guilty, and then I was just like, I really had to strip down to like, oh, this is what I can do.
Yeah.
And that can also just be me checking in on someone and making sure they're okay. And that is just like, it could just be really simple as a text to someone, like all of these things are, like, if anything, it's all about community, and it's all about collective, like it really is. And I think I'm hoping that that's one of the things that people are getting from even dealing with COVID. It's just this idea, it's not just an individual, that it's all of us, in some way, that we can't just survive on our own.
Yeah, absolutely. It's well, I mean, everything that's going on in Ukraine right now, they can't, it's yeah, no one, the earth is not an island. Like we're all
Right.
in this together.
Hmm.
So I have two kind of final things.
Hmm.
So Kirkus Reviews did write that this book begs for a sequel. Have you had any thoughts about that, or do you really want this to be a standalone, you know, maybe some fan fiction where people write the sequel?
I love that idea of fan fiction. Yeah, I haven't thought of a sequel. I really do believe that it could, that the story has yet to come, you know, like I really want, I love that a reader might be able to like think about what would happen to Luna and where would Pedro go and where would Rafa, you know. But I also do love, I love this idea, you know, because I'm a sucker when it comes to those kind of shows. Like, you know, I would
Right?
watch this on a TV show and be like, oh, what happens? You know, what does it
Yeah.
look like? Are we gonna go into the dystopian part of the world, you know? And so who knows? You know, I can't say no, but as of now, I don't have anything slated yet.
All right. And then I like to ask people for 3 book recommendations.
Okay.
So they can be something you read recently. They could be a really old book. Just, you know, 3 books off the top of your head.
Yes. It's funny because I have them in my front of me because I keep them. I just finished reading this memoir, which I love very much. It's My Broken Language by Kiara Alegria Hudes. And she's a Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, but she's also written In the Heights, you know, the movie. So, and the Broadway hit. So it's really beautiful. And her writing was gorgeous. I also got this book. It's called Do You Sound Like a White Girl by Julissa Arce, who's
I
coming
think
out.
I have an arc of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
it
I do
comes
have
out.
that on my, yeah.
I think it's next week or it's soon, but she just gave me a copy of it over the weekend and I was very lucky. So I'm excited to read that.
Okay.
And then the last one, I know I'm lucky. I just got this. You might have this arc as well. And this is forthcoming. The Man Who Can Move Clouds by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. And it is also a memoir, but it's an interesting memoir. I feel like it has speculative elements in it. So I'm very excited to read it. And those are the 3 books.
I'll have to see if we have one at the store, or just let somebody you know to, you know, try and grab an arc when they see it.
Yeah, I think
so cool.
It's gonna be gorgeous. And it's she wrote Fruit of the Drunken Tree that came out a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And so you'll remember that.
Yes, I recognize that one for sure.
Yeah. And so this is her memoir that's coming out.
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly when, but.
Excellent. Well, thank you. I'm so glad you had those handy, because sometimes when I ask people, they're like, wait, I can't think of one. And I'm like, yeah, I know that. I'm sorry.
I was lucky. I just had them because I'm like, these are the books I want to read next. So they're right there.
Yeah, I have to keep some on my nightstand too for that. Although I have so many digital ones too. It's just so many books, so little time. What did they say though? Recently, I read a couple different things that just having more books around you makes you smarter, even if you don't read.
Even if you don't read them.
Yeah, there's something about like, because maybe you've read the back cover and it's made you think of something else. I don't know. I'll have to find it, but it makes me feel better about all of my bookshelves. Well, thank you again so much for being here with me tonight, for supporting our little indie bookstore. And I'm so excited to tell more people about your book. I really enjoyed it. It makes me now want to go back and read some more classic science fiction that maybe over the years I've just been like, that's not for me. And then, you know, I just need to get it because they are telling such interesting stories. And some of them, I mean, they're timeless because somebody's always an alien, you know, and obviously there is that correlation of immigration as the alien.
Right. You know, I'm interested in those. I love, it was really fun to be able to reread the ones that I've read back in the day. And see them in a different light in a lot of ways. So, thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
Thank you again. I hope we'll run into each other at another conference here soon when everything is, you know, more back to normal and we can have more of those fun things. If you ever make your way down to our neck of the woods in Oregon, please feel free to stop by. We would love that. And I'm just so thankful for authors like you who continue to support indie bookstores, because indies are where it's at. I'm actually wearing my indie bookstore shirt for 2022 because we did a staff photo. So thank you again. I've really enjoyed this, and I just wish you the best of luck with all of your upcoming books. And now that I've looked at some of your previous books, I'm trying to think of which one that I really want to go back now and read. But I'm definitely
You
going
want to never look back, or dealing in dreams, or never
I
look back.
think it was Never Look Back.
Yeah.
That as soon as I was like, oh, I think I'm going to have to add that one. I will
I
definitely be
appreciate
reading
it. Thank you
your
so much for
backlist.
thinking of me, and it's and I love indie bookstores, so it's my pleasure to talk to you.
Well, excellent. Thank you, everybody, for continuing to support Roundabout Books as you have through the last couple of years, and will continue as we expand and hopefully can bring more amazing authors like Lilliam to you to find out more about their books and just read more things that make you a better human. So happy reading to everyone, and have a great evening. All right, so let me get